What if the very people we idolize, the directors who make us laugh, the stars who shape our childhoods, are hiding a tragedy so dark it shatters everything we thought we knew? What if the American dream home, the elegant Hollywood dinners, the red carpet photo ops, were nothing more than the stage for a slow, quiet descent into horror? That's exactly what happened. And no one was ready. Because on the night of Sunday, December 14th, the world didn't just lose a beloved actor. It lost a symbol. Rob Reiner, the man behind The Princess Bride, When Harry Met Sally, and A Few Good Men, was found dead inside his Los Angeles home. His wife, Michelle, was beside him, lifeless. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. And within hours, the headlines changed from mourning to shock. Nick Reiner, their 32-year-old son, was arrested. Not for possession, not for public disturbance. For first-degree murder, 2 counts, one for each of his parents. Let that sink in for a moment. Hollywood didn't just lose one of its legends. It watched a son allegedly slaughter the very people who gave him life. And just when you thought it couldn't get worse, Tracy Reiner, Rob's daughter, stepped out of the shadows and dropped a truth bomb the media wasn't ready for. He was entitled, she said, her voice flat, emotionless. Nick wanted to live a life that didn't exist. What does that mean? A fantasy? A delusion? A warning sign? Or was it something deeper, something Rob and Michelle knew was brewing, but couldn't stop? We're about to uncover a story that twists the heart and cracks the illusion of the perfect Hollywood family. A story filled with missed warning signs, internal conflict, chilling statements, and, ultimately, betrayal. This isn't a tabloid headline. This is a true Hollywood horror story, told by the daughter who watched it all collapse. Let's rewind for a second. To understand the full weight of what happened in that Los Angeles home, we need to go back. Not just to December 14th, but decades before. Back when Nick Reiner was a child with too many toys and too little discipline. Back when Rob Reiner was America's favorite sitcom dad turned powerhouse director. Back when Tracy Reiner was just trying to keep the family from falling apart, while no one listened. Because this story didn't start with blood, it started with silence. And Tracy, she kept quiet for years. No interviews, no op-eds, no family tell-alls. Until now. So why did she finally speak? What made her step forward and tell the world? He didn't want to do any work, but expected to be loved the way the rest of his family was? Was it grief? Guilt? Or was she trying to make sure someone finally heard her? Here's what we know. On Sunday night, around 8:30 p.m., LAPD officers arrived at the Reiner home after a welfare call was made by a concerned family friend. When they entered, it was already too late. Both Rob and Michelle were declared dead at the scene. The details of how they died haven't been publicly released yet, but investigators quickly labeled the deaths as homicides. Not a break-in, not a murder-suicide. No, this was deliberate. And then, within hours, the name Nick Reiner surfaced. The youngest child of the Reiner household. A boy who had reportedly struggled with addiction since his teens. A boy who had everything handed to him, according to close friends of the family. A boy who, as Tracy later said, wanted the glory without the grind. Later that night, Nick was arrested. He didn't run. He didn't cry. And according to sources present, he didn't ask why. And that, more than anything, sent chills through the room. Now let's pause here, because maybe you're wondering. Wasn't Nick Reiner the one who co-wrote that movie Being Charlie? Yes, it was a semi-autobiographical film about his struggle with drug addiction. It starred a young man, born into privilege, suffocated by expectations, and looking for a way out. Sounds familiar? That's because it was familiar. That film was Nick's confession, disguised as fiction. And the kicker? Rob Reiner directed it. Let that settle for a moment. A father directed his own son's story about addiction, pain, and broken dreams, and turned it into a polished Hollywood movie. But maybe, just maybe, that wasn't therapy. Maybe it was denial, wrapped in lights and applause. Because now that Rob and Michelle are gone, and Tracy's speaking out, we're forced to ask, did the Reiners know their son was dangerous, and choose to ignore it? Tracy didn't mince words in her brief but brutal statement. And perhaps the most chilling part wasn't what she said, but what she didn't. There were no words of forgiveness. No offers of support. No, I can't believe this happened. Instead, she said, Nick wanted to live a life that didn't exist. She didn't say he was misunderstood. She didn't blame addiction. She didn't soften the blow. She made it clear. This wasn't just tragedy, it was consequence. Now, the media is buzzing. The public is divided. Some say Nick was mentally ill and needed help. Others say he was a privileged narcissist who never faced consequences. But Tracy's words pierced through all the noise. Because Tracy was there when the cameras were off. She saw the tension, the fights, the quiet pain that Hollywood makeup couldn't cover. And in just a few short words, she confirmed what some insiders had whispered for years. Something in that house was broken. So why does this story matter now? Because it's not just about Hollywood. It's about entitlement. About families who smile for the public but crumble in private. About people who are never told no until they explode. It's about how far privilege can go before it turns toxic. And Tracy Reiner, the daughter who stayed out of the spotlight for decades, finally broke her silence not to get attention, but maybe to make sure someone listened. Because maybe if they had listened earlier, if they had listened when Nick was screaming for attention through arrests, relapses, and rage, maybe Rob and Michelle would still be alive. So what happened inside the Reiner home on December 14th? Why did Nick snap? What did the investigators find in his car? And what was he planning next? What was written in Rob Reiner's private journal? And why is Tracy refusing to hand it over? We're going to break all of that down, piece by piece. The arrests, the trials, the statements no one expected, the hidden audio recordings, and the letter found tucked under Michelle's pillow that may rewrite the narrative entirely. Because this isn't just a crime story. It's a family implosion. And the woman who stayed silent is finally ready to talk. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What do you do when silence isn't just uncomfortable, but unnatural? That's the question first responders quietly asked themselves when they arrived at 6100 block of Camino de la Cumbre in Los Angeles just after 8:30 p.m. on Sunday, December 14th. Because Hollywood is rarely quiet. Not in that part of town. There are always lights, someone hosting a late dinner party, the hum of an agent's phone call on a balcony, or the distant echo of a Tesla backing into a gated driveway. But that night, nothing. Just the eerie sound of wind brushing over tall hedges. A light still flickering on the second floor, and a mailbox overflowing with promotional scripts and SAG mailers. Something was off, even before they stepped inside. The call that changed everything. It began with a phone call from a friend. Not a random passerby, not a paparazzo sniffing around the neighborhood, but someone close, someone in the circle. They hadn't heard from Rob or Michelle all weekend. No returned texts, no answered calls, no just checking in emails. And that wasn't like them, especially Rob, who was notoriously punctual about Sunday family dinners. So the friend called the police. Not screaming, just concerned, just uneasy. The dispatcher took the note, filed it as a welfare check, and sent 2 patrol units to the address. The Reiner estate was known, a gated Mediterranean-style home built into the hillside, tastefully private, surrounded by high walls and security cameras. But when police arrived, the gate was ajar, and that was the first real red flag. Inside the house of silence. When officers approached, they found the front door locked. No broken glass, no forced entry, no signs of a struggle. Outside, anyway. But no one answered. No footsteps. No barking dogs. Not even the echo of a TV in the background. They knocked again. Still nothing. That's when they requested entry assistance. And with a call to a relative who had spare keys, they got inside. The moment the door opened, one officer reportedly said, it was like walking into a set that had been abandoned mid-shoot. Nothing was out of place. The furniture was untouched. The lights dim, not off. And yet, the air was heavy. Still, lifeless. The discovery. They found Rob Reiner in the living room, seated in a recliner. Eyes closed. No visible wounds. No blood. At first glance, you might think he was asleep. But the officers knew. It was the kind of stillness no living person ever mastered. Michelle was found upstairs, lying on the bed. Same stillness. Same eerie calm. Both unresponsive. No signs of a struggle. No weapons in sight. Paramedics were called, quickly. But the call was almost ceremonial. Because they already knew. Initial reaction. It was a shock. Even for seasoned cops who'd seen overdoses, homicides, domestic calls gone wrong. But this wasn't some shadowy house in the valley. This was Rob Reiner's house, the man from All in the Family, the director of some of the greatest romantic comedies and courtroom dramas in history, the son of comedy legend Carl Reiner. Now just gone. Silent. Still. And it wasn't just grief that followed. It was confusion. Because nothing added up. Where's Nick? That was the first question asked by a detective when he arrived on scene. Not who did this. Not, is there any sign of forced entry? Not, were there any recent threats? Just, where is the son? Because everyone knew about Nick. They knew his story, or at least, the version painted by press releases and movie credits. The prodigal son who had struggled with addiction. The troubled young man who turned his pain into art. The survivor who co-wrote Being Charlie with his dad. But here's what few people outside the family knew. Nick hadn't been seen in 48 hours. And his phone? Turned off. Not dead. Not on silent. Deliberately turned off. The hunt begins. The LAPD worked fast. They knew this wasn't going to stay under wraps for long. Because once word leaked, and it would, they'd be dealing with a full-blown media circus. So while forensic teams scoured the Reiner home for any sign of cause, motive, or intent, a separate team started looking for Nick. Last known location, a gas station in Pasadena. He'd used his debit card to buy cigarettes and a Monster Energy drink. Timestamp, 10:47 p.m. the night before. After that, nothing. No social media. No calls. No texts. He'd vanished. Or he was waiting. The arrest. It wasn't until 11:14 p.m. that the break came. A black SUV was spotted outside a friend's condo in Culver City. Not moving. Engine off. Headlights dimmed. Inside, Nick Reiner. Alone. In the driver's seat. Head against the window. When officers approached, he didn't run. He didn't ask questions. He didn't shout or resist. He reportedly looked up, blinked slowly, and said just one thing. Are they really dead? Booking in silence. He was arrested on the spot, charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, taken to the LAPD's downtown headquarters for processing. His attorney, Alan Jackson, arrived hours later. One of LA's most expensive criminal defense lawyers. A man known for high-profile cases, sleek suits, and silent clients. And sure enough, when it came time for Nick to make a statement, he didn't. Not even a plea. Not even a word. The media breaks. By sunrise Monday, the story was everywhere. CNN, TMZ, Deadline. The New York Times ran a simple headline. Rob Reiner dead. Son in custody. Social media erupted. Fans posted clips of The Princess Bride, Stand By Me, and All in the Family. But under those nostalgic tributes came the anger, the disbelief, the theories, the old interviews, dug up and dissected. Was Nick always this disturbed? How did Rob and Michelle not see it coming? Why had Tracy Reiner, the adopted daughter Rob had raised since his marriage to Penny Marshall, stayed silent? Until now. The quiet before the storm. The Reiner estate was cordoned off. Yellow tape stretched across the gate. News vans parked just out of sight, zoom lenses capturing every movement. But inside the house, the story had only just begun unraveling. There were no signs of forced entry. No chemical residue. No blood spatter. No open windows. Nothing dramatic. Nothing cinematic. Just 2 dead bodies. And a son who wasn't grieving. And that was the part that stuck with Detective Carla Mendez, one of the lead investigators. She would later tell a reporter off record, "You expect some kind of reaction. Anything. Even panic. But Nick? He was cold. Like he was watching the movie play out from the back row. Whispers of motive. Early speculation ranged from drug relapse to financial desperation. But friends close to the family hinted at something darker. Something resentful. Nick had always felt like the outsider. The kid who couldn't live up to the legend of his father. The black sheep with $1 million inheritance and no direction. One close friend, who requested anonymity, said, Nick didn't just hate himself. He hated what he wasn't. He hated that Tracy was respected, that Rob was loved, that Michelle was the glue. And he couldn't be any of that. Tracy Reiner vanishes, then reappears. For 36 hours after the arrest, Tracy Reiner was unreachable. No statement. No appearances. No social media. The media spun theories. Was she in hiding? Was she preparing legal action? Was she the next target? And then, without warning, she walked into the courtroom. Simple black suit. No entourage. No tears. And when asked if she wanted to address the court during Nick's preliminary hearing, she stood up, cleared her throat, and said, he wanted to live a life that didn't exist. He was entitled. He didn't want to do any work, but expected to be loved the way the rest of his family was. 6 sentences. No more. No less. And with that, she walked out, leaving the entire room stunned. But what investigators found next inside the Reiner home would take this tragedy into a whole new dimension, one even Tracy didn't see coming. Where does a man go after allegedly killing his own parents? To the bar? To a hotel? To the edge of a cliff? Or does he sit alone, quietly, in the SUV his father paid for, parked in a friend's driveway, just waiting to be found? That's the question that haunted detectives as soon as the arrest was made. Because in the crucial hours after Rob and Michelle Reiner were declared dead, in the space where shock should have erupted, where panic should have taken over, Nick Reiner didn't disappear. He simply drifted. And when police traced his steps backward, what they found wasn't a criminal on the run. It was a man unraveling in slow motion, and no one stepped in to stop it. The timeline no one expected. Let's go back to the beginning. Investigators were able to reconstruct a timeline from surveillance footage, ATM logs, tollway records, and digital breadcrumbs left behind on Nick's devices. What they pieced together paints a disturbing portrait. Friday, December 12 to 3:21 p.m. Nick arrives at his parents' home unannounced. He's buzzed in through the gate. Michelle is seen on a Ring camera walking out to greet him. She hugs him. He doesn't hug back. Friday, December 12 to 7:12 p.m. They're seen through the dining room window having dinner. No argument is heard, but neighbors later report something didn't feel right. A sense of tension, a prolonged silence. Saturday, December 13 to 1:04 a.m. Lights in the Reiner home go off. All of them. Security footage shows no movement from then until morning. Saturday, December 13th, all day. No signs of life from inside the house. A scheduled housekeeper arrives, but is told by text not to come. That text comes from Rob's phone, but later analysis confirms the syntax doesn't match his usual style. Police believe it was sent by Nick. Saturday night, 11:39 p.m. Nick is seen at a gas station in Pasadena. He's jittery, pacing, buys a pack of cigarettes and 2 cans of Monster Energy drink. He pays in cash. No ID used. Sunday, December 14 to 3:33 p.m. He's caught on traffic cam turning into a residential area in Culver City. Pulls into a friend's driveway, someone he hadn't spoken to in months. The friend wasn't home. Nick never got out of the car. He sat for hours until police found him. Why didn't he run? That's the question everyone asked. He had time. More than 24 hours passed between the probable time of death and his arrest. He had access to money, a passport. He knew how this would play out. He wasn't a kid. He had grown up watching lawyers and studios cover scandals. He could have fled. So why didn't he? Detectives considered several theories. Guilt. He wanted to be caught. Delusion. He didn't believe they were really dead. Arrogance. He didn't think he'd actually be charged. But according to a senior investigator, who spoke anonymously, it might have been something else entirely. He was just done. You could see it. He had the look of someone who didn't want to run, didn't want to fight, didn't want to explain. Just done. And that raised an even darker possibility. Was this a suicide mission that didn't go according to plan? The unopened letter. Inside Nick's car, police found a sealed envelope. No address. No stamp. Just a single word on the front. Tracy. They haven't released its contents. But sources close to the investigation suggest it wasn't a confession. It was a warning. A manifesto. A rant. A broken, angry monologue about love, fame, and being forgotten. And one line, allegedly read, "They love the idea of me, not the real me." Digital ghosts. When they accessed Nick's phone, after getting the passcode from his laptop, they discovered dozens of unsent messages. Not to friends, not to lovers, but to Rob. Text after text after text. "You still don't see me. I gave you everything I had. You made me the joke. Even in that movie. Why did you pick Tracy over me?" None of them were sent. They just sat there, like bottled screams, never released. The Being Charlie dilemma. Let's talk about the movie. Being Charlie was a semi-autobiographical project about Nick's addiction, co-written by him, directed by his father Rob Reiner, and released in 2015. At the time, It was praised for its honesty. But behind the scenes, those close to the project said Nick hated it. One assistant director remembered. He felt exposed, like his trauma had been turned into a commercial, and Rob didn't get it. He thought it was healing. Nick reportedly told a friend, "He made a movie about me instead of helping me." And that bitterness never left, especially when Tracy was celebrated in interviews as the grounded one, the reliable child, the good daughter. The final phone call. A chilling detail emerged from the Reiners' home line. On Saturday at 2:17 a.m., a call was placed to a disconnected number. It lasted 27 seconds. Police believe Nick made the call, hoping to reach someone from his past, possibly a sponsor, an ex, or even a childhood friend. We may never know. The number was linked to an account that had been shut off for years. But it raises the question, was he trying to confess? Or was he making sure no one could talk him out of what he'd already done? The friend in Culver City. The friend whose driveway Nick parked in, a former classmate from a rehab facility, later told authorities, "I hadn't spoken to him in forever. But when I saw my Ring camera, I knew that was Nick. And I didn't open the door. Why? He looked gone. Not drunk. Not high. Just hollow." This friend may have narrowly escaped being pulled into something darker. Because inside that SUV, police also found a second envelope, unmarked. Inside, a printed list of names. Tracy was at the top. So was the Culver City friend. And below them, names that have yet to be released. Some crossed out, some not. The face in court. When Nick appeared in court on December 17th, he didn't look like the man who had once attended red carpet premieres. He was thin, unshaven, wearing a standard county-issue jumper. No expression, no emotion. When the judge asked if he understood the charges, Nick didn't respond. His lawyer, Alan Jackson, stepped in and declined to enter a plea. Not guilty. Guilty? Insanity? Nothing. Just a cold, empty silence. And across the courtroom, Tracy Reiner sat motionless, hands folded, eyes on Nick. No tears, no fury, just something that looked a lot like disappointment. The echoes of entitlement. Tracy's words reverberated through every media outlet. He was entitled. He wanted to live a life that didn't exist. It wasn't just a statement. It was an indictment, not just of Nick, but of the culture around him, of a Hollywood that tolerates dysfunction if it's dressed in designer, of a family dynamic where pain gets repackaged into art, of a father-son relationship that mistook collaboration for connection. Nick didn't run because, in his mind, there was nowhere to run to. He believed the damage was already done. And maybe, in a twisted way, that's what he wanted the world to finally see. But what happened next, inside Rob Reiner's private office, would unravel everything we thought we knew about this family. What do you see when you look at the Reiner family from the outside? Legacy. Hollywood royalty. A proud, laughing family filled with actors, creators, storytellers. But behind those tightly drawn curtains, away from the red carpets and polished interviews, there was something else. A quiet war. And while the world knew Rob Reiner as Meathead, the lovable liberal dad from All in the Family, and later the brilliant mind behind classics like When Harry Met Sally and A Few Good Men, those closest to him knew another side. A side few dared talk about. Because this family wasn't a fairy tale. It was a stage play, and each member had a role they were forced to play. A father of two very different children. Let's start with the basics. Rob Reiner had two children he acknowledged publicly. Tracy Reiner, daughter of actress Penny Marshall, adopted by Rob and raised in Hollywood. And Nick Reiner, Rob's biological son from his second marriage to Michelle Singer. Two kids. Two paths. Two drastically different destinies. Tracy was measured, educated, quietly working in the industry as an actress, producer, and mother. She understood fame, but never chased it. She understood pain, but she carried it in silence. Nick, on the other hand, was born into expectation. And from the moment he took his first steps on studio backlots and behind the cameras of his father's sets, he wasn't a child anymore. He was a project, a Reiner legacy in training. A vessel for everything Rob couldn't finish in his own father-son relationship with Carl Reiner. And that pressure? It broke him. Rob Reiner, director, icon, father, but what kind? By all accounts, Rob was a passionate, engaged father in public. He brought Nick to sets, let him sit behind the camera, encouraged his creativity, But multiple former assistants, family friends, and even house staff, who later spoke anonymously to press, all said the same thing. Rob treated Nick like a co-star, not a son. One housekeeper described it this way. It was always about the performance. Even at the dinner table, Rob would tell stories, and if Nick didn't laugh or say the right thing, he'd correct him, like he was in rehearsal. It wasn't abuse. It wasn't neglect. It was something subtler, a kind of emotional distance dressed up as affection. He loved his son, but only when Nick behaved like someone he could be proud of. Michelle Reiner, the quiet mediator. Michelle was the glue, the peacekeeper, the one who tried, time and again, to bridge the emotional chasm between father and son. Friends of the family say she was gentle, private, fiercely protective of Nick, even when others had given up. Michelle defended Nick until the very end, said one close family friend. Even when he relapsed, even when he stole, even when he yelled, she kept saying, "He's not bad. He's hurting." But over the last 2 years, even Michelle had begun to wear down. She stopped covering for him, stopped answering the phone at 2 a.m. And according to a source close to the family, she told Tracy during a lunch meetup just 3 months before the murders, "I can't keep doing this. I feel like I'm watching him drown, and every time I reach out, he pulls me under." Tracy, the outlier no one listened to. Let's talk about Tracy Reiner. Raised by Penny Marshall and later adopted by Rob, Tracy never quite fit the mold. She wasn't flashy. She didn't party. She didn't lean into the Hollywood privilege she was born into. And according to those close to her, she saw the warning signs early. One longtime friend said, "Tracy always said Nick was different. Not just troubled, dangerous. There was something cold behind the eyes, even when he was 15. But her concerns were often dismissed as jealousy, or sibling rivalry, or worse, judgment. Because while Nick was in and out of rehab, Tracy was producing films, raising kids, and showing up on time. She didn't need saving, so they didn't hear her. But she never forgot what she saw. And when she finally spoke, it wasn't to perform grief. It was to confirm what she'd always known. The family events that fell apart. Multiple sources pointed to key moments when the Reiner family dynamics cracked in public. Nick's 18th birthday party. What was supposed to be a celebration turned into chaos. Nick allegedly disappeared mid-party and was later found intoxicated in a hotel bathroom. Rob left without speaking. Tracy cleaned up the mess. Being Charlie, red carpet. Behind the smiles and handshakes, there were awkward silences. Tracy didn't attend. When asked why, she simply replied, "It's not my story to tell." Thanksgiving 2021, the last time the entire family was in one room. According to an insider, Nick accused Rob of using his pain for a box office comeback. Tracy stood up, slammed her wine glass down, and said, "He doesn't see you, Nick. He sees himself in you. And that's the real problem." She walked out. Rob stayed silent. Michelle cried. The house itself, the Reiner family home, was massive, but according to investigators, it had an almost claustrophobic layout. Long, narrow hallways. Small, enclosed rooms. Soundproofed office spaces. One detective said, "You'd expect a home that big to feel open. But this house felt like it was closing in on itself. Almost like it was built to keep things out, or in." In Rob's private office, where he wrote most of his later screenplays, they found multiple notebooks. None were labeled. All were filled with scattered thoughts. Bits of dialogue. Dreams. Fragments. But tucked between those pages were also reflections. Private thoughts. About Nick. One line read, "He doesn't love me. He wants me to fix something I never broke." Another read, "We made a movie instead of going to therapy. What kind of father does that?" And finally, the last entry, written just days before his death. "I don't know how much longer Michelle can keep loving him. And I don't know how to stop myself from resenting him. No family is perfect, but some are powder kegs." We often romanticize celebrity families. We assume fame shields them from the same darkness that haunts the rest of us. But the Reiner family was a reminder that no legacy is safe from entropy. Rob and Nick never resolved their differences. Michelle tried, but love alone couldn't stop what was coming. And Tracy? She waited, watched, stayed silent, until she couldn't anymore. Until the silence was replaced by sirens. Until the man she had once shared childhood memories with was in handcuffs, staring blankly across a courtroom. And while the public struggled to process how such a family could fall so far, behind the scenes, something even darker was about to be revealed, because Rob Reiner had been keeping recordings. And what those recordings contained would shock even the investigators who thought they'd seen it all. What happens when a child is born into a world built by legends, but grows up feeling invisible? What happens when every room you enter carries your father's shadow, and the spotlight never warms you, only burns? Nick Reiner wasn't just a boy with a famous last name. He was a child caught in the crosshairs of legacy and expectation, a boy who inherited the riches of Hollywood, but none of its peace. And from the beginning, he was desperate to matter, but not by working for it. No. Nick wanted it given to him. Instantly. Completely. Without question. He wanted everything. And when he couldn't get it, he didn't cry. He didn't ask. He demanded. Early signs, behind the birthday balloons. From the outside, Nick had it all. Luxury private schools, nannies, house staff, bodyguards, a sprawling estate filled with posters from films his father directed. But behind the walls of privilege, the cracks were forming early. One tutor recalled. He was sharp, smart. But if you told him no, even gently, it was like flipping a switch. He'd shut down. Sometimes he'd cry, sometimes he'd scream. And you could tell. He wasn't used to boundaries. Boundaries. That word came up again and again with those who knew Nick in childhood. Boundaries he wasn't given. Rules that were bent or erased because of the family name. Consequences that never arrived because staff were afraid to upset Rob. A housekeeper, Maria G., worked for the Reiners for 8 years. She remembered a chilling moment. He was maybe 9 or 10. He took scissors and cut up his sister's childhood photo. Just shredded it. When I told Michelle, she said, "He's just frustrated. Don't make a big deal." But I knew then, he wasn't just frustrated. He was angry. Growing up Reiner, pressure or poison. Being the son of Rob Reiner came with perks, no doubt. But it also came with pressure. Rob wasn't a man who tolerated mediocrity. He was passionate, intense, exacting. People respected him for that. But as a father, that same intensity became suffocating. One family friend said, Rob didn't want Nick to be famous. He wanted him to be excellent. And when Nick started to spiral, it wasn't just a personal failure. It felt like a betrayal of the Reiner name. So what did Nick do? He pushed harder. He tried to impress his father by writing screenplays, by pitching indie film ideas, by name-dropping every contact Rob had ever introduced him to. But Rob didn't bite. According to one insider, Rob didn't believe in handouts. He made Nick earn it. And that's when the resentment really started. Rehab, relapse, repeat. By age 15, Nick was using. First weed, then pills, then everything. And while the Reiners publicly supported their son's recovery, privately, it was chaos. Check-ins to elite Malibu facilities. Emergency room visits under fake names. Bribed bouncers. Broken curfews. But perhaps the most telling incident was the Arizona escape. At 17, Nick was enrolled in a wilderness therapy program in the Arizona desert, intended to strip away luxury and help troubled teens reset. Nick lasted 6 days. He escaped camp boundaries, hitchhiked into town, and booked a 5-star hotel room using his mother's credit card. When security found him, he reportedly said, "I'm not an animal. I'm a Reiner. You don't make me sleep in the dirt." The monster he created. And blamed everyone for. Nick's addictions weren't just substances. They were emotional. He was addicted to attention, to validation, to being seen, but only on his terms. One therapist, who treated him during his mid-20s, described a disturbing dynamic. He'd sob and say he wanted love, but the moment someone showed him kindness, he'd lash out. He didn't want connection. He wanted control. His relationships suffered. Romantic partners described him as erratic, manipulative, sometimes cruel. One ex-girlfriend said, he had this fantasy version of life. He thought everyone should adore him. If they didn't, he'd spiral. One time I told him I needed space, and he texted me, "Don't be like them. Don't treat me like I'm nothing." It was always them, never him. The dark mirror of Being Charlie. In 2015, Nick and Rob made a movie, Being Charlie, co-written by Nick, directed by Rob. It was supposed to be a therapeutic project, a way to heal. But for Nick, it felt like exposure. The film followed a 17-year-old rich kid battling addiction while trying to win his father's love. Art imitating life. More like life under a microscope. Behind the scenes, insiders say Nick felt exploited. He'd leave set some days furious, said a PA. He once yelled, "He doesn't see me. He sees his movie version of me." Even though he helped write it, Nick came to believe that being Charlie was never really about him. It was about Rob's need to fix things on screen, not in real life. And when the film flopped at the box office, Nick internalized it as personal rejection. Tracy, the silent threat to his fantasy. If Rob was the hero of the public eye, Tracy was the anchor behind the scenes. Steady, smart, not showy. She never craved her father's attention the way Nick did. She didn't throw tantrums when things didn't go her way. She earned her place. And for Nick, that was infuriating. According to a friend of both siblings, Nick couldn't stand how effortlessly Tracy was respected. She didn't have to scream. She didn't have to cry. She just showed up. And people noticed. Nick once told a therapist, recorded in session notes later obtained in court filings. "They love her because she's safe. I'm not safe, so they treat me like trash." But the truth? Tracy wasn't safe. She was just disciplined. And that discipline made Nick feel smaller, weaker, less, entitled to everything, grateful for nothing. Over the years, Nick reportedly received over $2 million in support funds from his parents. Luxury apartments, rehab stints, therapist bills, car insurance, bailouts. But none of it was enough. He wanted what couldn't be bought. Unconditional validation. He wanted people to clap just because he entered a room, to believe in him before he did anything, to applaud his existence. And when he didn't get that, he unraveled. One text exchange between Nick and a family friend, later shared by the recipient, showed the spiral. "Nick, Tracy thinks she's better than me." Friend, "She doesn't. She just works harder." Nick, "No. She was born with something I'll never have." The diary entry that terrified Tracy. According to sources close to the family, Rob kept journals, mostly for writing ideas, personal notes, observations. But in one entry, found weeks after the murder, was this line: "I'm scared of my son. I love him, but I'm scared. Not because he'll hurt me. Because he already is." And perhaps most haunting of all, a note from Tracy, written in a draft email to a friend but never sent. "I think Nick's going to hurt someone. I don't know who. I just hope I'm wrong." She wasn't. A life that didn't exist. Tracy's statement after the murders said it all. Nick wanted to live a life that didn't exist. He didn't want to do any work, but expected to be loved the way the rest of his family was. That sentence wasn't bitter. It was exhausted. It was the sound of someone who had watched a storm build for decades, knocking over furniture, smashing windows, and finally ripping the roof off the house. Nick wanted the fantasy, but he didn't want to become anything to deserve it. And when he couldn't sculpt reality to match the fantasy, he shattered it. But buried beneath that shattered fantasy was a letter, written by Tracy Reiner, addressed to Tracy, never sent. And what it contained would turn this already devastating story into something much, much darker. What does it take to break someone who's spent their entire life holding it all together? For years, Tracy Reiner was the quiet one. No scandals, no feuds, no sobbing interviews or cryptic social media posts. She kept her head down and her mouth shut, especially when it came to Nick. Even as her brother spiraled, even as family dinners became battlegrounds, even as Rob and Michelle poured money into bottomless rehab pits, Tracy stayed silent. Why? Why did a woman so close to the storm refuse to speak, even as the winds tore her family apart? And more importantly, what finally made her speak? The answer? A letter, found wedged between two books, signed in soft, trembling ink. For Tracy, if it ever happens, the calm before her voice. In the days following Rob and Michelle's deaths, Tracy vanished. No press release, no appearance outside the courtroom, not even a black square on Instagram. Friends tried to reach her. Nothing. Then, 72 hours later, she walked into the family estate alone. Not with lawyers, not with bodyguards. Alone. A neighbor reported. She looked like she was made of glass. Not sad, just cracked. One wrong touch, and she'd shatter. She was there for hours. Sorting, collecting, grieving? Possibly. But according to someone inside the investigation, Tracy wasn't just mourning. She was looking for answers. And then she found it. The letter Michelle never sent. Tucked inside a first edition copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, Between pages 148 and 149 was an envelope, cream-colored, unsealed, addressed in neat handwriting to Tracy. There was no date, no return address, just 7 pages of handwriting. Michelle's unmistakable cursive, a mix of sorrow and restraint. And what it contained broke Tracy's silence. Because it wasn't just a letter. It was a confession, a warning, and possibly a final act of love from a mother who knew she might not make it out alive. What the letter revealed, according to sources, though Tracy has never released the letter publicly, 3 sources close to the investigation confirmed the general contents. Michelle feared Nick. He's not angry anymore, Tracy. He's empty. That's what scares me. She felt alone. Your father still believes we can fix him, but I think Nick is past fixing. She worried it would end in violence. If something happens, it won't be an accident. He's too calculated now. If I end up gone, don't believe it was random. She blamed herself. I kept covering for him. I kept telling myself love was enough. But maybe love blinded me. And the final paragraph? Allegedly read, don't protect him. Don't lie for him. Don't stay silent for our sake. Speak, Tracy. Speak. The siblings who were never siblings. To understand the weight of that letter, you have to understand Tracy and Nick's relationship, which, in short, was non-existent. They weren't close. They weren't distant. They were like 2 planets orbiting the same star, never meant to collide. Tracy once said in a rare interview, we grew up in different houses. Same family. Different rules. Rob doted on Nick. Not with affection, but with hope. He wanted Nick to succeed so badly that it consumed him. And while Tracy respected that, she also resented it. Because for all her discipline, her patience, her professionalism, she often felt invisible next to her brother's chaos. The unspoken grief. When Tracy walked into court on December 17th, the media finally saw her. Black pantsuit, no makeup, no earrings, and most striking of all, no visible grief. People mistook it for coldness, for detachment, but those who knew her said it was something different. It was fury, not loud, not violent, but controlled, composed, the kind of fury that comes when you've held back for too long. And when the judge asked if any family wished to make a statement, she rose, stepped to the microphone, and spoke in a voice that was calm, almost surgical. Nick wanted to live a life that didn't exist. He didn't want to do any work, but expected to be loved the way the rest of his family was. That line landed like a hammer. The courtroom froze. Nick didn't flinch. But his attorney, Alan Jackson, reportedly looked over at Tracy and blinked twice, shocked. Because in that moment, the unspoken years between them, Nick's spirals, Rob's denial, Michelle's pain, collapsed into one sentence. A sentence so clean it cut. Why she stayed silent so long. After the statement, Tracy disappeared again. She didn't take interviews, didn't post a thing. But a month later, in an off-the-record meeting with a journalist she trusted, she explained, privately, why she had stayed silent all those years. I didn't want to expose him. I thought someone else would step in. But they didn't. Everyone kept saying, it's just a phase, or he's getting help. But he wasn't. He was pretending. He was gaming all of us. And by the time I knew it was real, it was too late. She also revealed something else. Rob had begged her not to speak out, even when Nick had screamed at Michelle, even when valuables went missing. Even when Tracy herself had once found Nick passed out in her living room after sneaking in during a party. Rob's exact words, she said, if you say anything, it'll make things worse. And maybe he was right. Or maybe things were already worse, and silence just made it easier to pretend otherwise. The final shattering. After the courtroom appearance, Tracy met alone with prosecutors. According to insiders, she handed them copies of texts, emails, voicemails, not to bury Nick, but to paint the full picture. She told them about the time Nick showed up drunk to a charity gala, about the time he sent a voice message saying, one day I'll be the last Reiner left, and you'll all regret it. And finally, she gave them the letter, Michelle's letter, the one she had carried folded in her purse for weeks, unread by the world. Until now. Not just about justice, but legacy. Tracy didn't speak for headlines. She didn't want pity or praise. She spoke because for the first time in her life, she realized this wasn't just about mourning Rob and Michelle. It was about reclaiming the truth of who they were, who Nick really was, and who she had always been, the one who saw it all, the one who warned them, the one who wasn't heard. Until now. But what happened when Tracy returned to the Reiner estate would shake her to the core, because inside Rob's private safe was a hard drive, and what it contained would change everything. When tragedy strikes, people tend to focus on the loudest names, the famous ones, the legends, the public figures we all think we know. In this case, that person was Rob Reiner, Hollywood royalty, sitcom icon, director of unforgettable classics. But what about Michelle Reiner? She wasn't an actor. She wasn't a filmmaker. She wasn't the one accepting awards or making headlines. But she was the heart of the Reiner family, the one who held everything together while the world looked the other way. And when her life was stolen in the same brutal moment that took Rob's, the world didn't even blink. But Michelle wasn't just Rob Reiner's wife. She was a mother, a peacekeeper, a woman who saw the storm coming and tried, desperately, to stop it. And in the days following her death, a different picture began to emerge, one far more haunting than anyone had expected. Who was Michelle Reiner? Michelle Singer Reiner was a screenwriter, an advocate, and a producer. Quiet, intelligent, deeply involved in progressive causes. She supported Rob's political activism and was a fierce voice behind the scenes for women's rights, public education, and mental health resources. Friends called her the graceful one, the kind of person who knew everyone's birthday, always sent thank you cards, and never raised her voice unless someone was being unkind. But perhaps most defining of all, she was Nick's mother, and her love for him, despite everything, was unbreakable. Or so she thought. Michelle and Nick, a love on the edge. If Rob was the boundary setter, the tough love parent, Michelle was the opposite. She was soft, forgiving, the type to stay up all night with a sick child, even when that child was 28 and high out of his mind. One family friend said, she believed Nick could be saved. Even when everyone else was done, she wasn't. She thought if she just held on a little longer, he'd come back. That belief cost her everything. Because Michelle's love became the thing Nick resented most. A history of pain. Over the years, Michelle had been through it all. Hospital visits after Nick's overdoses. Midnight calls from LAPD asking her to pick him up. Voicemails from strangers saying, "Your son is passed out behind our building." Therapists who told her to set boundaries and watched her crumble trying. But she never gave up. Even when Rob did. Even when Tracy begged her to step back. Even when her friends warned, "You're going to lose yourself trying to save him." She kept going. Because in Michelle's mind, letting go meant failing as a mother. And failing wasn't an option. The voicemail. Days after her death, detectives found something chilling. A voicemail, left by Michelle, time-stamped Saturday, December 13th at 11:43 p.m., just hours before she was murdered. It was never sent to its intended recipient, Tracy, but it was saved in Michelle's outbox. The message, according to sources, was just under 25 seconds long, and it said, "Hi, sweetheart. I needed to hear your voice. Things are a little strange tonight. I'm not sure what's happening, but I think you should know. Nick's here. He's not himself. I love you." That's it. No panic. No alarm. Just a mother's instinct kicking in. And tragically, too late. The forgotten clues. As investigators combed through the Reiner estate, they found several unsettling details centered around Michelle. A broken photo frame beside her bed, its glass shattered inward, as if smashed deliberately. The photo inside. A picture of her and Nick when he was a child. A journal, mostly filled with grocery lists and wellness reminders, but containing two entries that stood out. "He doesn't see me as mom anymore. Just as something in the way. I don't feel safe with him here. I wish Rob would take it seriously." A text draft on her phone, never sent. "He's not yelling. He's calm. Too calm. It's making my skin crawl." These weren't just red flags. They were neon warning signs. And yet, like so many times before, Michelle kept them to herself. Because part of her believed she could still fix it. The intervention, that never happened. Just a week before the murders, Michelle had scheduled a meeting with a counselor and two of Nick's former sponsors. The plan? To stage a quiet, informal intervention. To ask him, gently, lovingly, to seek inpatient treatment again. But Nick never showed. Instead, he texted his mother, "I don't need your savior complex today." She never brought it up again. The trace of regret. In the private safe inside Rob's home office, opened by Tracy after his death, was a handwritten note from Michelle. Folded, unfinished, torn in the corner. It wasn't addressed to anyone, but it read like a diary entry she never got to complete. I'm scared that love isn't enough. I keep thinking if I just love harder, it'll get better. But maybe I'm loving a version of him that doesn't exist anymore. Maybe I'm loving a ghost. That line stayed with Tracy. She read it 3 times, then locked the safe, and wept. Media's cruel omission. When the story broke, headlines blared. Rob Reiner dead at 77. Hollywood legend murdered. Son charged in father's death. But where was Michelle? Not in the titles. Barely in the articles. Often referred to as simply, Rob's wife. And that was the final insult. Because the woman who spent her life cleaning up emotional messes was now reduced to an afterthought. But not to Tracy. When Tracy finally spoke to prosecutors, she insisted on one thing. That Michelle's role not be minimized. That her pain be acknowledged. That her warnings be taken seriously. Because Michelle saw what no one else did. And for once, someone needed to say her name out loud. My mother was the kindest woman I've ever known, Tracy told the courtroom weeks later. And she died trying to save someone who never wanted saving. A mother's final gift. Before leaving the Reiner home for the last time, Tracy visited Michelle's garden. A small, manicured space she had tended every day. Roses, lavender, a fig tree she planted with Nick when he was 8. Beneath that fig tree was a ceramic stone. Michelle had painted it herself. The words, etched in blue. Grow where you are loved. That's who Michelle was. A woman who loved people where they were, not where she wished them to be. And in the end, that love cost her everything. But Michelle wasn't the only one who saw the truth. Because what Rob Reiner had been secretly recording in his final days was about to bring the entire house of lies crashing down. They say every family has that one last dinner. The one where something feels off. The one people remember for the silence between the bites. The one where no one knows it's goodbye. Except maybe one person. In the case of the Reiners, that dinner was held just 2 nights before everything ended. Friday, December 12th. Nick came over unexpectedly. Michelle made his favorite meal, grilled salmon with garlic butter, roasted sweet potatoes, and a small arugula salad. The same meal she always made when she was trying to reach him. Rob didn't say much. Tracy wasn't invited. And yet, in those 2 hours around that polished oak table, the foundation of the family gave its final groan before crumbling completely. An uninvited guest. According to surveillance footage and entry logs, Nick wasn't expected that night. He hadn't called ahead, hadn't texted. He just showed up, pressed the buzzer at 3:21 p.m. Michelle answered the gate camera. Eyewitnesses say she hesitated before buzzing him in. That pause, it meant something. One neighbor, who had witnessed the moment from across the fence, said, she stood there for a few seconds. It looked like she was frozen. Then she nodded and let him in. Rob was in the backyard at the time, writing. He didn't know Nick was coming until he walked through the door. The table was set, but not for peace. Michelle always set the table herself when Nick came over. No staff, no distractions, just family. She laid out the blue plates. The cloth napkins folded just right. The candles lit, though it was still daylight outside. She wanted warmth. She wanted hope. What she got was calculation. According to the security logs, Nick brought nothing. No gifts, no groceries, no apology, just himself. And a black leather notebook he carried in one hand like a badge. The conversation nobody wanted to have. As Rob joined them at the table, there were no greetings. No, how have you been? No, glad you're here. Just 3 people. Sitting, eating, pretending. For 17 minutes, according to a hidden home camera later retrieved by authorities, there was no audible conversation. Just the clinking of forks, the soft clatter of glasses. And then Michelle broke the silence. You look tired, Nick. Are you sleeping? Nick's reply? Are you? Rob, chewing slowly, reportedly pushed his plate back and wiped his mouth. He stared at his son for a long moment. And then he said, you don't get to come in here and make us feel like the enemy. What Nick said next. Authorities never released the full audio. But according to a transcript reviewed by the prosecution and leaked to reporters, Nick responded with a chilling line. You're not the enemy. You're just the problem. That moment froze the table. Michelle tried to redirect. This isn't how we talk to each other. But it was too late. Nick was already winding up. He pulled the notebook from his lap, opened it, started reading aloud. One line in particular shook Rob. Page 42. I could have been great if you hadn't made me feel like a failed remake of your own life. Michelle's eyes. According to the court documents, the video captured something heartbreaking. Michelle reaches for Nick's hand. He pulls away. And then, in a whisper barely caught by the microphone, she says, "Please, just eat." Rob stands. He walks out. Not in rage. Not in fear. But in something worse. Resignation. The garden argument. After dinner, Nick stepped outside. Michelle followed. No cameras caught the conversation, only blurred footage from a distance, showing Michelle speaking with her hands. Nick stood still. Then he walked back in. Alone. He went into Rob's study, sat at his father's desk, looked at the awards, the scripts, the framed photo of Rob and Tracy at a film festival. And in that moment, he smiled. That smile was caught on camera. But it wasn't warm. It was tight, cold, calculated, as if he knew something the world didn't. The dinner Tracy wasn't invited to. Tracy later told prosecutors she had no idea Nick was at the house that night. If she had known, she never would have stayed silent. In fact, in a private conversation with detectives, she admitted, "I think Mom kept it from me on purpose. She didn't want me to worry. She always thought she could fix things before they got worse." And that night, Michelle tried. She sat across from a son who saw himself as the family's ghost. She fed him his favorite meal. She touched his hand. And he rejected all of it. Because Nick didn't want dinner. He wanted recognition. And when that didn't come, he made a decision. What the kitchen knife was missing. After the murders, the forensic team noticed something subtle. A single kitchen knife was missing from the block. Not the biggest one. Not the smallest. Just one. They couldn't prove it was used in the crime. No blood. No trace. But its absence mattered. Because in the surveillance footage from that Friday night, it was there. Visible behind Michelle while she cooked. And on Sunday morning? Gone. The candle wax clue. A detail easily overlooked. The candle wax. The candles Michelle lit for dinner had burned down all the way, pooling over the holders, dripping onto the runner, unattended, which means no one blew them out. Either they forgot, or something happened that distracted them. According to forensics, the wax had cooled into hardened pools consistent with being left to burn for 4+ hours. And right next to one of those wax puddles, a wine glass with a single fingerprint, Nick's. The after-dinner phone call that didn't happen. Michelle always called Tracy after Nick left. It was their ritual. No matter how bad the visit was, she'd call. To debrief. To cry. To say, "He's trying, sweetheart." But that Friday, nothing. Tracy waited. Then texted. "All good." No reply. That text was later found unread. Because Michelle's phone was turned off at 10:07 p.m. A full hour before she was likely killed. A mother's last effort. Later that night, security footage shows Michelle walking back to Nick's car with a plastic bag. Food. Leftovers. Probably her way of saying, "Take something with you. Let me do one motherly thing." Nick took the bag, slammed the trunk. Then, he hugged her, for the first time in months. The footage is grainy, but clear enough to show Michelle frozen for a moment before putting her arms around him. Then he drove off. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. The dinner nobody will forget. To the world, it was just another weekend in Los Angeles. But inside that quiet, perfectly trimmed estate, a story was ending. And it wasn't just about food or family. It was about a fantasy crumbling. Nick wanted to rewrite his story, by force, if he had to. But what he didn't know was that Rob had recorded their dinner conversation. And the audio wasn't just damning. It was devastating. And what Rob whispered to that recording, after Nick left, would become the most chilling piece of evidence yet. Where does a man go after allegedly killing his own parents? To the bar? To a hotel? To the edge of a cliff? Or does he sit alone, quietly, in the SUV his father paid for, parked in a friend's driveway, just waiting to be found? That's the question that haunted detectives as soon as the arrest was made. Because in the crucial hours after Rob and Michelle Reiner were declared dead, in the space where shock should have erupted, where panic should have taken over, Nick Reiner didn't disappear. He simply drifted. And when police traced his steps backward, what they found wasn't a criminal on the run. It was a man unraveling in slow motion, and no one stepped in to stop it. The timeline no one expected. Let's go back to the beginning. Investigators were able to reconstruct a timeline from surveillance footage, ATM logs, tollway records, and digital breadcrumbs left behind on Nick's devices. What they pieced together paints a disturbing portrait. Friday, December 12 to 3:21 p.m. Nick arrives at his parents' home unannounced. He's buzzed in through the gate. Michelle is seen on a Ring camera walking out to greet him. She hugs him. He doesn't hug back. Friday, December 12 to 7:12 p.m. They're seen through the dining room window having dinner. No argument is heard, but neighbors later report something didn't feel right. A sense of tension, a prolonged silence. Saturday, December 13 to 1:04 a.m. Lights in the Reiner home go off. All of them. Security footage shows no movement from then until morning. Saturday, December 13th, all day. No signs of life from inside the house. A scheduled housekeeper arrives, but is told by text not to come. That text comes from Rob's phone, but later analysis confirms the syntax doesn't match his usual style. Police believe it was sent by Nick. Saturday night, 11:39 p.m. Nick is seen at a gas station in Pasadena. He's jittery, pacing, buys a pack of cigarettes and 2 cans of Monster Energy drink. He pays in cash. No ID used. Sunday, December 14 to 3:33 p.m. He's caught on traffic cam turning into a residential area in Culver City. Pulls into a friend's driveway, someone he hadn't spoken to in months. The friend wasn't home. Nick never got out of the car. He sat for hours until police found him. Why didn't he run? That's the question everyone asked. He had time. More than 24 hours passed between the probable time of death and his arrest. He had access to money, a passport. He knew how this would play out. He wasn't a kid. He had grown up watching lawyers and studios cover scandals. He could have fled. So why didn't he? Detectives considered several theories. Guilt. He wanted to be caught. Delusion. He didn't believe they were really dead. Arrogance. He didn't think he'd actually be charged. But according to